September 1st, 2014 marks the 75th anniversary of the beginning of World War II. It began on September 1st, 1939 with a German attack on Poland. The war initially was a war of the Polish army against a much larger German and Slovak army that invaded not only from the west but also from the south. The Poles had allies, but they didn't show up. Poland fought alone in those first days. There are many misconceptions about the beginning of the war, and one of them is that the Polish campaign was very brief, there were few German casualties, and the Polish army collapsed. The Polish Air Force was destroyed on the ground, and whatever futile efforts the Poles made consisted of cavalry charges against armored vehicles. Nothing could be further from the truth. And although Poland did not mobilize its forces completely, over 40%, for example, of Polish reservists never made it to their units. It was because England and France, hoping not to make the Germans angry, asked the Poles not to mobilize. So the Polish mobilization came late. Before the Polish army could be fully mobilized, the Germans were well on the attack. Nevertheless, the Poles fought with incredible courage. One of the things that we don't realize is how heavy the German losses were, and how brilliantly, despite all of their problems, their lack of the most modern equipment and very serious problems with communications, how brilliantly the Poles fought. The German losses, if we look at this campaign, which lasted from September 1st to early October 1939, are very heavy. Let me give you some example of what the German losses were. According to an authoritative source, the Germans suffered 16,000 dead and 32,000 wounded. The material losses were 564 aircraft, 1 ship, 200 guns and mortars, over 1,000 tanks and armored cars, and 12,000 other vehicles. The German losses amounted to 1/4 of all of the German tanks and vehicles that were used in the campaign. 1/5 of all the German aircraft was also shot down. We know now, as a result of research after the war, that the Germans used up 80% of all of the ammunition they had. This is a fact which their Polish allies in the West did not take advantage of. German defenses were severely taxed in the West, and Germany simply didn't have the men and materiel to defend against a Western attack. France and England did not attack. The famous British military historian John Keegan tells us the Polish army fought more effectively than it has ever been given credit for. It sustained resistance from September 1st until October 5th, a period of 5 weeks, which compares very favorably with the 5.5 weeks during which France, Britain, Belgium, and Holland together kept up the fight in the West the following year. So when we look at the Polish campaign, we see not the debacle that Western historians have tried to portray, but really a magnificent effort by the Poles to try to carry their share of the struggle against Nazi Germany. It was easy for Goebbels to launch a propaganda campaign that showed the Poles as inept and surrendering without giving much of a fight. And this served the interests of those people in the West who said, well, I guess we couldn't have helped them anyway. We know, in fact, that during the campaign, the Poles launched several major counteroffensives. 3 German divisions were very severely mauled, and we know German units made up of raw recruits broke and ran several times during the campaign. The war in Poland was accelerated by the fact that on the 17th of September, Hitler's ally Stalin invaded Poland. The Red Army, led by 4,000 tanks, invaded Poland. And here the defenses were maintained primarily by lightly armed border defense people. And they fought valiantly. One case, Lieutenant Balbot, with a small force, held off thousands of Soviet troops. And we know his last communication was that we are surrounded. The enemy has set fire to the woods around us, but everybody is at his place and firing back. That was the last transmission. The Soviets lost about 2,000 soldiers in those few weeks and a great deal of material and aircraft. So even on the Eastern Front, when everything else was collapsing, the Polish courage and tenacity put up one of the best shows that World War II had ever seen. The Polish campaign was more intensive than anything the German army sustained until the Russian campaign of 1941. What the story of the 1939 campaign reveals is the courage, the tenacity, and the tremendous loyalty of Poland and Polish soldiers to the cause of freedom and their willingness to fight to the end for those values that all of us in the West believe in as necessary for a decent and human, civilized human society.